As we live through a political environment ripe with seemingly unprecedented bitterness and division, it begs the question of whether we've ever before seen anything like the upcoming 2020 presidential election, with two sides so entirely polarized. President Trump and Republicans towing a conservative, America First line, Democrats headed in an increasingly socialist, globalist direction. Have we seen this movie before? Indeed we have. I'm Tim Donner with 5 facts about a presidential election 47 years ago with striking parallels to 2020. Fact 1. The 1972 presidential election featured an almost identical political landscape as 2020. Consider the following scenario: a Republican president reviled by the left and the media, the corresponding growth of a radical collectivist resistance, and a Democratic Party intent on drawing as sharp a contrast as possible with the president, with policy prescriptions seemingly driven by emotion, and consequently prepared to nominate a far-left candidate for president, and somehow believing such a candidate could take down an explosively controversial president elected by a previously silent majority. Sounds like 2019 or 2020, but that was 1972. Fact 2. The facts on the ground in 1972 mirror those of 2020. Richard Nixon had won a narrow victory in the presidential election 4 years earlier in 1968, when the nation was ripped apart by the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, race riots across the land, and growing protests over the Vietnam War. Revolution was in the air. Nixon appealed to voters who were turning against the war but rejected the growing violence and anti-Americanism in the anti-war and hippie movements, which shook the country to its core and threatened the status quo. Fact 3. The response to the 1968 election was similar to 2016. Once Nixon captured the White House, the resistance turned up the heat, just as the left has done since 2016. And in 1972, a senator from the far left fringe of the Democratic Party, George McGovern, wrested the presidential nomination from establishment figures Ed Muskie and Hubert Humphrey and, believe it or not, segregationist George Wallace. Yes, in those days, the Democratic Party was more, shall we say, eclectic. The establishment candidate split the vote, allowing McGovern to seize the nomination and face Nixon in the general election. Fact 4. The Democratic nominee in 2020 will likely be at least as far to the left as George McGovern in 1972. McGovern supported unilateral withdrawal from Vietnam, dramatic reductions in the military budget, and an overhaul of the welfare system in favor of a guaranteed income for all Americans. The entire current top tier of Democratic presidential candidates, including Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, all support a full government takeover of health care, as well as the Green New Deal, which would entail a government takeover of the entire economy at a cost of tens of trillions of dollars. And party rules now favor a non-establishment candidate like McGovern in '72. In 2016, the Democrats tipped the scales in favor of the establishment candidate Hillary Clinton in her battle with Bernie Sanders, just as they had done in 1968, in both cases infuriating their political base. So for 2020, just as in 1972, the Democrat Party has eliminated the rules which provide a built-in advantage for establishment favorites, clearing the way for a progressive that stirs the hearts of their left-wing base, like George McGovern in 1972, to carry the Democratic Party banner into the general election. And that brings us to fact 5. The 1972 election ended in a landslide. President Nixon was reelected by a 24% margin, 62 to 38%, and carried 49 out of 50 states, with McGovern winning only Massachusetts. Though a lot can change in the months leading up to the next election, the similarities between 1972 and 2020 are indeed striking. The current president is even more despised than Nixon, the resistance is similarly full-throated, and the Democrats appear intent on delivering their nomination to one of a boatload of candidates trying to prove they are further to the left than the rest of the pack, hate Trump the most, and can check the most intersectional identity politics boxes. Clearly, the Democrats would have to defy history to deny President Trump a second term. But before you start planning for Trump's second inauguration, remember that Trump himself certainly defied history in 2016. Please subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel. You'll get these 5 facts videos, plus Truth TV, author interviews, Liberty Nation Radio, and our podcasts, The Uprising and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose. I'm Tim Donner. Thanks for watching.